When will Washington get serious about regulating big tech? Is this it? Is this the turn tech investors have been concerned about for a long time?
Well, it appears as if we're definitely one big giant step closer. Although this really isn't a commitment. They haven't announced a case. They haven't announced an action.
Right.
This is some folks going on background saying this is how we're going to sort of divide up our responsibility. They've said, all right, FTC, you're taking Amazon and Facebook, and we, the DOJ, are going to take on Google. But you could have nothing happen here, and it wouldn't be much of a surprise based on the cadence of government action to date. But it's definitely a flare across the bow and maybe, hopefully, a sign of things to come.
Scott, it was very interesting. Bank of America Merrill Lynch analysts this morning said actually long term it might be good for the valuation of companies like Alphabet and Google, of course, if they were broken up. What is the case to be made that this is a good thing?
That's exactly the correct question. And we saw what is arguably one of the worst days that these technology firms have had in a long time. They literally shed tens of billions of dollars today on this threat. And if you look empirically at what happens when these companies either do a spin, as eBay did with PayPal, or what happened to the telco companies after they were broken up, in almost every instance, maybe not in the short term, but in the medium and the long term, the aggregate value of the spun companies is much greater than the original conglomerate. So this might actually be a buying opportunity.
Scott, potential, therefore, to be making some money out of this. But what do you think the precedent is here to look at? Is it looking at fines that we're likely to see? Maybe we look towards what happened in Microsoft years ago, or do we look more towards perhaps trying to change the business model, as the EU has potentially done, but really only tinkering on the edges when it comes to Alphabet, the parent of Google? What do you actually think that Congress could really pass that might turn into some sort of realistic regulation?
Well, there are fines, but the fines have proven themselves to be somewhat negligible. As a matter of fact, I would argue they don't discourage these companies; they actually embolden them, because a $3 to $5 billion fine on Facebook levied by the FTC is equivalent to 7 days of income or 7 weeks of cash flow. So this almost sends a signal that you can get away with these things. Regulation hasn't proven to be very effective, but antitrust, breaking these guys up, I think would be, in my view, solves a lot of the problems. I think competition here would give each of these companies an opportunity to try and make the case on different dimensions, including whether it's content that's screened, that is less dangerous for our teens, or perhaps the opportunity for more venture-backed companies as they see an opening in companies that aren't dominated by monopolies. But I think antitrust is absolutely the way to go here.
Scott, I don't remember what year it was, but a long time ago when Facebook bought Instagram, I don't think anyone was talking about regulators and whether a deal like that should be blocked. I feel like an equivalent deal today to buy such a red-hot company probably would see a lot of scrutiny. And so I'm wondering if this has a ripple effect across the startup landscape, as companies whose future was premised on flipping to a Facebook or a Google or an Amazon will have to accept that maybe that's not going to be as easy in the current environment.
Well, you're correct. I would argue that the FTC's clearance of the acquisition of Instagram by Facebook was probably the greatest regulatory failure of the last 10 years in business.
Wow.
And it's probably going to be unwound. And what you have here is, in my opinion, the DOJ and the FTC have not done a great job. And whereas attorney generals and the DOJ are worried about Sprint and T-Mobile merging and bringing together 130 million people and see that as a threat, we have one company talking about encrypting the backbone to create one seamless network across a population greater than the Southern Hemisphere, and that's Facebook, who could reach 2.7 billion people with an encrypted backbone of WhatsApp, Instagram, and Messenger. So a population greater than the Southern Hemisphere, decided by the algorithms, controlled by one person who cannot be removed from office. So this is overdue, quite frankly. We have a long, proud history of antitrust, and it's time we started living up to that history.
But Scott, you're saying you think it will be unwound. I just fail to see how perhaps that might be supported really in a bipartisan nature that widely. Do you really think that we will see WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram once again redistributed? And indeed, what's the answer therefore for Alphabet? Do they sell off? Because Google is the main priority there. Would they have to split that business in some sort of way?
So I don't know the exact format this will take, but right now, if you look at Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google, what I am comfortable predicting is these 4 companies will be most likely 6 to 10 companies in 2 to 5 years. The concentration here is killing innovation, destroying jobs, and we've seen evidence everywhere that it leads to really bad behavior. In the case of Google, I believe that overnight, if you spun YouTube, you would have 2 viable search engines. YouTube decides to go into text-based search. Google decides to go into video search. And rather than coordinating and cooperating, you have 2 viable competitors in a market, search, that is now bigger as a category than the entire advertising market of any nation with the exception of the U.S. And we have one company that controls 93% of it. So all the free marketers out there, I agree with you. The answer isn't more regulation. The answer is competition, and we need to oxygenate the marketplace with the DOJ and the FTC breaking these guys up. Better for the planet, better for the economy. And those stocks, the aggregate value of those companies and the shareholder accretion here is substantial as independent companies as opposed to conglomerates, which over time have proven to be less innovative.